The epic. The classic examples of the epic in European literature are the Iliad and the Odyssey by the ancient Greek poet Homer. They served as models to all later epic poets. Each of these great works is a long tale in verse with famous heroes for its principal characters. It weaves together into an artistic form the many legends of their exploits, which were handed down from generation to generation by word of mouth in song and story. The story of the Iliad, for instance, existed as folklore long before Homer collected its scattered fragments together to form a splendid whole. The events of the epic may have been magnified by tradition and the poet's own imagination, but some of them undoubtedly belong to actual history, like the siege of Troy. The mighty warriors and princes who are leading figures may really have existed, though in the poem they are given almost superhuman dimensions. Their actions are often subject to the personal intervention of the gods who preside over their destinies and form a separate group of characters with their own loves and rivalries in almost every classical epic. The supernatural and magical element is always prominent. The language of the poem is, of course, noble and exalted, as befits the words and deeds of gods and heroes. It is in the grand style and makes no attempt to resemble common speech. Conventions of the epic. The theme of the epic is stated in the first few lines, accompanied by a prayer to the muse. The statement of the theme is technically called the proposition, and the prayer, the invocation. Virgil's Aeneid, which is an imitation of Homer's Iliad, and Milton's Paradise Lost, which follows the Aeneid, both begin with a clearly defined proposition and invocation. The epic employs certain conventional poetic devices, such as the Homeric epithet, a term or phrase sometimes quite lengthy, applied again and again to a particular person, place, or thing, and the Homeric simile, which, setting out to make a comparison between two similar objects, develops into a piece of elaborate description, a word picture, almost a short poem in itself, designed to capture the reader's imagination. The action of the epic is often controlled by supernatural elements. In Homer and Virgil, these are the classical gods and goddesses. In the most ancient European epics, the Old Norse deities play a prominent part, but those of the Christian era can scarcely be said to provide a parallel, as the conception of one supreme omnipotent God alters the whole scheme. What is important in these is not the exploits of one hero, but the triumph of a holy cause, the victory of the believers over the heathen, of good over evil. Supernatural agencies fight on both sides, but they are of different order and have limited powers. The famous Italian epics of Ariosto and Tasso follow these lines. In Spenser's Faerie Queene, which we may regard as an epic, most of the characters are themselves personifications of good and evil qualities. In Milton's Paradise Lost, of course, there are only two human characters, and they are almost passive in the strife between the powers of heaven and hell. The epic contains a number of thrilling episodes, such as the mustering of troops, battles, duels, wanderings, ordeals, and the like. In this respect, they are all modeled upon Homer or Virgil. The epic is divided into books, usually 12 in number, though the Iliad and the Odyssey have 24 books each. The reduced number was first adopted by Virgil, who was followed in this by later European writers. Spenser's Faerie Queene was planned in 12 books, and Paradise Lost was raised to that number from the original 10. The moral purpose is not prominent in the early epic. In Homer and Virgil, there is little beyond the appeal to patriotism and national pride. The Italian poet Tasso introduced the moral and didactic elements into his Jerusalem Delivered. The purpose of Milton's Paradise Lost is to justify the ways of God to men.